Getting off the subway, stepping into Staying Strong for Marriages. How's everyone doing? Hey, it's been a little while since I posted, so I want to say hi to everyone. I also wanted to celebrate the Chiefs' victory in the Super Bowl. That was pretty fun. Today, what I'm going to be doing, as you saw in the thumbnail, was basically a response to Neal Doster's comments. You guys should go check those out. Those are really, really interesting, and I wanted to just, it's more than I was going to be able to type out as a response. And actually, I'm not going to really go into a lot because Neal is, maybe he works professionally in this situation. But I like Neal because I like people who give a rip, who are thoughtful, they're willing to spend the time and the effort to advocate for what they think is the best for, the Christian community. It is a serious calling. It's a high calling that we have. It's really interesting. So let me just say a couple things before we head into it. One, I think it's going to apply to all of us because wherever you are in the stand for the restoration of your marriage, I think we can all be honest and say that there's just times and days when we're like, this sucks. Like, maybe this is what God has called us to. Maybe this is what it's about, turning the other cheek. Maybe this is, being faithful, being long-suffering. Maybe it's trying to become like God and following maybe what he did with the rebellion and the adultery that went on with the people that we see in the Old Testament, the Israelites, Judah and Israel and all of that. So, and I did a video for that, so I'll put it in the cards and you can check it out if you're not familiar with that, if you're new. But look, basically it's like there's some days where it's like, geez, you may love your spouse. I think we all do. But we also in the back of our mind, we're thinking, what if they're not going to treat us right? You have been hurt. You have decent reasons to think, maybe I don't want to get hurt again. Maybe they're not going to change. Maybe I know people that seem to be in a better place in life. And maybe, just maybe if God would allow me to, maybe that would be something that I'd be interested in. Now, as a guy running a marriage restoration channel, I know I'm probably not supposed to say that, but I'm not going to BS you guys. I think if we're all honest, we've definitely all kind of thought those thoughts before and said, you know what, I do love my spouse. I do believe in things like forgiveness, that God, will work, that God will sanctify, but maybe we're not seeing it happen. Maybe we just have some other serious concerns. And I'm going to do a video on trust because I think that's a big part of it. Okay, so let's talk about Neal's post and why he posted. Basically, if you want to find his comments, you need to go to the video that I did. It's called Recommending Bibles and Burpees channel. So if you haven't seen that video, basically it's about a woman named, or the channel is basically done by a woman named Mindy. She is, long story short, she's recently separated from her second husband because she was married once. She is a Christian. She got remarried, and she's come to believe that that marriage was not approved of by God. She's, kind of been influenced by, say, the marriage permanence people. She looked at the scriptures, and she basically said, you know what? I don't want to live in adultery. I don't want to, do that with my second husband. I don't want to set that example for my kids. I don't want to set that example for my, community, my Christian community. And, maybe there's that verse, that says like the beginning of wisdom is the fear of God. And so maybe she had some people maybe misinform her, maybe deceive her, or maybe not. But what I like about her is that I like anybody that, has the courage to do hard things, right? I think it just sucks to be like a coward and live scared and be like, well, that's too hard. I'm not going to try. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to go on this journey with God. I'm not going to live by my standards. I'm just going to look for a loophole and find a bunch of yes people, yes men, yes women, and just, go do what I want to do. So look, in the broader sense of the church, at least the American church, Mindy's a weirdo. Most of us are. It's like the standard kind of path of what are you going to do after you get divorced is, you're going to go find another Christian, you're going to get married, and you're going to keep it rolling. That's kind of the standard thing that we see most people doing. That's been my experience. I know very few people that are like standing for their marriage, praying for restoration, refusing to get in a second marriage. And even people that pray with me for the restoration of my marriage are in their second marriages. Most of the people are. And so, that's awkward. I don't make it awkward, but, there's points when, I don't always see eye to eye with everybody. Most people don't see things the way I see it. Maybe most people don't see things the way you see it. So Mindy, she leaves her second husband, and she makes a YouTube video about it. It's gotten way more views than I've gotten, because I mean, her move is way bolder, and it draws a lot more attention. She paid a higher price. I'm just reviewing articles for the most part, so she's got to have like 25,000 views at this point, and probably a lot of you guys have seen it by the time you make it to this channel. So I get all this stuff from Neal, and he's basically like, you shouldn't recommend her channel, Brian. This isn't a good example. She's not doing the right thing. Maybe he's personally involved. And I don't know the details. I don't know the details of her first marriage. If there was an affair, if there wasn't an affair, I mean, I haven't watched her channel in a long time, maybe like 8, 9, 10 months. So I don't know the details. But what I do know is her most recent husband, his name is Tom. They have children together. Her first husband's, I guess, name is Brian. And so there you go. So he basically makes a few points, and you guys should check it out. He posts a lot, like 50 points. Some of them are, I think, like pretty close to saying the same thing, or they give like a new angle on it. But let me give you the rundown. And what I want to say is basically, one, my bias, so that you guys know, because subconsciously I'm going to be biased, is that I have really been influenced by the marriage permanence people. I mean, I would probably say that I'm in that camp at this point. And so you got to realize that that's, I'm not, I need to say that, so that when that comes through, it's going to dictate maybe some things I will say and some things, I don't say. But the big thing that he really has to say is, like, he's fine with people like me, looking for repentance, waiting for repentance, whatever. His issue is really with people that are the DTR, not define the relationship, but divorce to repent. And so some of the people that are in that camp would be, David Pawson. David Pawson is a big one. Also, all the people that I just put out on the 2020 best restoration, videos for marriage restoration. So Mr. Finney Smith, I think is his name. Also, Professor Joseph Webb. All these people are kind of in this marriages for life kind of camp. And so what we're going to call it is the marriage permanence movement is what he calls it. He actually critiques a guy from that movement by the name of Wilcox, and so I think his name's Stephen Wilcox. And so just go check it out. Even before like getting all, super deep in over our heads, I want to encourage you guys to sort through this stuff before you get in a marriage, because I don't want to see you guys. I know it was very hard for Mindy, right? I don't want to see, there are people, they get into their second marriage, they even bring kids into the world in their second marriage, and then they get confronted with this stuff and they decide, man, God's will is for me to go through another divorce. And they follow through with it, or they live with guilt, or they live with I know a guy, his whole marriage got all messed up because he couldn't figure out if it was righteous or sinful. And his wife, felt all that. She didn't feel loved. She felt condemned, or I don't know, didn't trust him as a leader. I don't know, but like, I don't want to see you guys get into these situations. So why I'm recommending reading all this stuff that Neal has given us is, figure it out before you go out and start dating, wasting all this time, all this money. Have a clear mind about what you want to do. I'm saying it too much. You guys know what I'm saying. But okay, so basically his one point that I really like that he makes, now I've thought about this before. If you go back to Deuteronomy 24, okay, Old Testament, okay, but basically the passage talks about a scenario where a woman gets married, she is kicked out or whatever, divorced by her first husband. She marries another husband. She gets divorced by him, and the passage goes on to say that it would be an abomination before God for her to go back to her first husband. And so the thing is, you see, kind of a priori, by just use of logic and reason, is that there's no condemnation over her second marriage, right? Which means, it means that in that context, what Moses was teaching was that second marriages are permissible. I think we could see that. I think we could pull that out of that scripture, because it's not like she's condemned from marrying a third husband, right? First one, it's just saying she can't go back to husband number one, which means she can go back to any other guy. right? If it didn't mean that, then why go out of the way of even saying it, right? All you need to say is, that's it. You can't marry anybody. That's not what it says. It says, she can't go back to husband number one. So by kind of default, you could assume she's free to marry anybody else. So that's a really, really important point that he makes and that we need to at least wrestle with and understand, because people are going to come at you with this. If you do decide to get remarried, you're going to need to have a sound mind about how you think about this. Okay, point number 2 that he makes, which is interesting. The word divorce, okay? Think about words. Find any word that doesn't describe something unique. I don't think you're going to be able to do it, right? I mean, we have words to describe specific things, and they mean something. They exist. For example, ketchup. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Elephants. We know what those are, right? Rain. Bad news, right? Everything that is a word, it's useful for a purpose. So he goes on to make the point. He's like, look, you have the word divorce. It has to mean something, right? It has to have some function. It's in Aramaic, I'm assuming, the language Jesus spoke, Greek, Latin, and then when it's translated, we have it in English. And so basically the idea is like, if the word exists, what's its purpose, right? He's arguing that it means, obviously, the normal definition of divorce. It means the end, the separation. Now, maybe they didn't have the word separation, or maybe they decided to always use the word divorce when you have two people going in different directions. Maybe it's referring to like, we put this legal document in with the courts or the, whatever, the government. Or maybe it means, before God, you have a separation and God sees that. He's like, this divorce is real. Basically his point is divorce is the thing that God, he uses this word. And if he uses this word, he must mean something by it. And we should understand that if he's going to try to communicate with humans, he's going to speak their language. He's going to use the words in the proper way. And so when he says, divorce, if he uses that term, it must mean because divorce can actually happen. A marriage can come to an end, not by death, but just by it got broken in the process. And he'll elaborate a little bit on that. But basically, I think he's going to fall into the Erasmanian camp. Basically, the idea that, if there's adultery, then you're free to remarry. That exception clause, unlike when, what is that guy's name? Dean Taylor. So if you go to my channel, there's a thing called Marriage Permanence View. It's like this view of a picture, mountains and grass in the background. And that's a long video, but it outlines Dean Taylor's ideas on the marriage permanence view. And Dean Taylor says basically like, you can't take the exception clause and apply it to both verbs, the first verb and the second verb. The first verb being divorces and the second verb being remarries another. He does this thing basically like, this example, if you get angry with your brother, no. Yes, if you get angry with your brother, except if he's sinned against you, and murder him, you've committed a sin. That's the same form as, if you divorce your spouse, except for adultery, exception clause in the middle, and marry another, so a second verb, you commit a sin of adultery, whatever, a sin. So in the same format, if you're angry with your brother, except if he sinned against you, and murder him, you've committed a sin. And so Dean Taylor basically says, look, that exception clause only applies to being angry. You're excused because of your anger, because you got sinned against. But certainly if you go all the way and you murder your brother, God's not going to excuse you. That's not how it works. You're not like you don't carry the sickle and the sword. You're not, you can't do that, right? So that's his thing. But anyway, so just so you know, that's kind of where Mr. Neal Doster, he departs. He actually says there's 3 reasons why a marriage can come to the end. So the first one, the normal old, there was an affair. Okay? So he says if there's an affair, the marriage is over, you can get remarried. Number 2, Jesus goes on, he says something else. He says, look, if there's lust in your heart, then he says, it's like, he says in Matthew 5, I say to you, anyone who lusts after another has committed adultery in the heart. And so Neal Doster, he says, okay, well, that is our second example. If you have lust in the heart, then you've committed adultery, and that can break up a marriage. The third one would be Matthew 5:32, which basically says it's possible, if you're not guilty of the first two, like if someone divorces you and you didn't A, lust after someone else and commit adultery in your heart, and you didn't B, have a full-on affair, and yet someone presents you with divorce papers, they're actually committing the adultery. And you can go check that out. You can read it in Matthew 5:32. But it basically says, to quote it, that, someone who does that to their spouse causes them to commit adultery. So adultery is caused in that. And he says it's really important. We need to understand if that's how the world works, we need to come to terms with that. Now, his big point is that basically, like, these three adulteries, they end marriages. And so a marriage that's been ended as Jesus understood it, as Moses talked about, we just talked about in the beginning, it's over. It's over. It doesn't exist. You're not committed to life. You're not committed unto death. That there's like special circumstances. And one of the quotes I really like from him, he says, one interpretation brings us into harmony with the Old Testament, talking about Moses, because we got to figure out what we're going to do with Moses. But he says one interpretation brings us into harmony with the Old Testament, and the other puts you on a collision course with it. So let's talk about Moses a little bit, right? Because you have to realize that Jesus in Matthew 5, he has these 6, people call them abrogations, these changes. And the typical form, you guys know, or what should be well aware of it, is, you've heard it said, this thing, but I say to you this other thing. And there's 6, right? Some people call them antitheses, but basically you got to figure out, what are you going to make of those? Why did he do that? Because we know he said that he didn't come to abolish the law. He didn't come to destroy the law or take one jot or tittle out from it, but he came to fulfill it. He came to fulfill the law. So we got to remember that and make some sense of it. But he does it on 6 different areas. He does it on murder. So if you hate your brother, the adultery in your heart, if you lust after someone else, divorce. It used to be, and I should read this one, but basically it was like, you've heard it said that, present your spouse with divorce papers. But then he goes on and he says, but I say to you that anyone who divorces his spouse, except for matter of adultery, sexual immorality, and marries another, commits adultery. So he changes it, right? Or, I always thought that he changed it, but that's the point up for discussion. You see it also with oaths. You see it with an eye for an eye, and you see it with loving thy neighbor, or I would call it like not resisting an evil person. So those are the 6. You can check them out in Matthew 5. But basically, he brings us to this point. He's like, look, who do you say Moses is? We're almost being told that Moses was some kind of like spineless guy, that he didn't have basically enough gusto to stand up for what God wanted. He was too weak to stand up against the complaints of the people. And he basically allows generations, right, from his time until Jesus' time, to just get in adultery, marriage, divorce, adultery left, right, and center all the time. Why did he permit them to do all this if it wasn't actually God's will? Did he blow it? Was the Spirit of God not speaking through him? How can we have this weird change from Moses to Jesus? And so basically, what do you think? Was the Old Testament inspired? Is it the truth of God? How do you make sense of this bit in Matthew 5 with these changes? So essentially, just to kind of wrap up, it's like, just really realize that, he says a lot of other things. But long story short, he's concerned about how we understand what constitutes adultery, what constitutes the end of a marriage. Is it death only, kind of like the stuff that I've been saying, or is it for some other reason? So you guys got to figure that out, right? You have to, and I have to too, right? I don't want to suffer anymore, right? One divorce, that whole experience was awful, and it's like, you can learn how to be single, and I don't want to, I don't want to do the wrong thing. And I honestly haven't figured this all out, which is why I don't spend time telling you guys what to think. I'm just covering these things. Neal has given us like a great amount of very thoughtful information, and I just want to encourage you guys to check it out, because like I said, I don't want you to get into a second marriage and have these people bring these accusations up against you, and you're like, oh, I'm not sure. Am I sinning? Am I living in adultery? Is God pissed at me? Am I going to lose, my inheritance in heaven? Is my name going to be blotted out of the Lamb's Book of Life, right? Like these people are saying is possible, because 1 Corinthians 6:9, do not be deceived. Do not be deceived that all these people are not going to inherit the kingdom of heaven. And idolaters and adulterers and many other types of people. So this is going to be brought to your plate sooner or later if you decide to remarry. And I just want to just warn you guys, and just take the time to check it out for yourselves. Hope you guys are doing great. We will talk to you later. Oh, hey, also, as I put on the end screen, just please don't go to Neal's post and reply and be a punk, I mean, just think about what he had to say. Consider it. You don't have to prove him right or wrong. It's not what this is. We're just trading notes. It's not like we're trying to fight each other and all this stuff. He's fairly intense, but I mean he's not rude. So just please be respectful. Thanks.